There's not a lot that we can agree on in this world, but there's one thing I think all of us can agree on is that not everyone should buy a house. Now, I'm not saying everybody doesn't deserve a home. Of course they do, but not everyone should be buying a house, especially in this economy. Not too long ago, I just got off a phone with a friend of mine whose daughter who is purchasing a house. She started telling me this whole story of how she's going to be able to purchase a house on her very limited budget. And I'm all for creative financing for buying a house, but this honestly is going to get this girl way in over her head. And I had to kind of like put my 2 cents in. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the 10 dumbest ways you could purchase a house. So that way you and your friends don't get in way over your heads in this economic climate. Not everybody should be buying a house right now. Let's just be honest. Back in 2007, when the market was like still like piping hot, a friend of mine bought her very first house. And at that time, she used something called a interest-only loan. So for a period of time, all she was doing was paying the interest on the house payment, but then it would set to the full payment within a couple years. The way that she got into that was absolutely crazy. Not only that, her husband was working for himself as a job and his income was kind of all over the place. Sometimes he'd make a lot, sometimes he would make a little. Everybody knows this now as predatory lending practices. It was stated income, and this is what pretty much caused the financial crisis. And she lost her house. But those loans have been coming and rearing their ugly heads once again. It isn't really stated income, but they're able to get these like interest only or these flexible arm type loans. The reason that home lenders are even doing them right now is because they haven't been writing as many mortgages like they did in the last couple of years. So they're trying to boost up their sales by offering these programs once again. And to me, this is a recipe for a disaster, not only for the housing market, but also for the people purchasing them. They are kind of promised that in the future it could possibly happen that the interest rates could go down, but that's a risk. You're gambling at that point. If you already are on a thin line with a payment and you're just able to make it because of this restructured aggressive loan in order for you to be able to purchase today, and you're afraid that you're going to miss out and your friends might be able to buy this house instead of you, please don't do that. Please do not do that. Make sure you're in a good financial situation before you ever do anything like this. I understand that people are in sales and in lending institutions are saying this is a good product, and it is if you're super responsible. But if you're just doing this just to get into a house and you're not even sure if it resets, you'll be able to afford that payment, please, for the love of everything holy, do not do this specific type of loan. It only makes it affordable for you today, but once it resets, you may not be able to refinance, and who knows what's going to happen. The market prices of homes could possibly go down. You may not be able to refinance, or interest rates could even go up even higher when you try to refinance in making that payment even higher. So if you're thinking about doing a loan like this, just say no. Just say no. Please talk to other family members when you're thinking about this. Talk to another loan specialist. Make sure you're in the right financial position that you can do something like this. Don't get me wrong, that product still exists for a reason. And if you use it responsibly, it's perfectly okay to use a loan like that to purchase a house. But if you don't know what you're doing and you're just hoping that this is going to be the thing that, gets you into your very first home, the consequences of this is possible that you end up in a terrible financial position. My friend who did this in Florida years ago lost her house, and she had to file bankruptcy, and she was in over her head because the house needed fixed up. And that's another thing. Let's talk about that, because some people I know have bought foreclosed properties. And don't get me wrong, you can get a really good foreclosed property for a really good price, but it also requires a lot of fixing up in most cases. Years ago, I bought a property that needed a little fixing up, not gonna lie. Add another like 10 grand to it, because I had no idea even back then how much roofs are. And today they're even more expensive. And if you want to see what happens to your homeowner's insurance whenever you have a kind of a iffy roof, it definitely goes up. So make sure you budget that out, especially if it's a foreclosed property, because the seller in most cases are not going to do any repairs on that foreclosed property. So price out everything you need to have done. The friend of mine who had her house foreclosed on, she didn't look up anything. She just bought the house willy-nilly because she liked the outside. I mean, don't get me wrong. People just make dumb mistakes when they buy a house, especially when they have their emotions tied into it. She was emotionally attached to the outside. It looked like one of those like Brady Bunch looking houses. And then when she got inside, of course, it needed new plumbing because all the trees had burrowed into the plumbing. So that's one thing you should check on when you're buying a foreclosed property. Make sure sure the plumbing is good. The roof needed replaced. That's always a really huge additional expense. The HVAC system needed to be replaced. The boiler system needed to be replaced. Oh, and she had to put in a new leach field. And when you're a brand new buyer and you're young and you're having your first baby, those kinds of expenses can ruin you financially. So always make sure you have a nest egg of money. I know that right now, like everybody wants a house, especially an affordable home, but don't get in over your head. It's just a really dumb way to buy a house. I'm now entering in my 17th year in real estate. And ever since I started on my very first day, there's always people that want to purchase a house, but can't necessarily afford one, mostly because of their credit score. And honestly, they can make credit scores work. They've done all sorts of things for a couple to be able to purchase a house. But I will tell you this, if your credit score is low, you're going to have a higher interest rate, making your payment even higher. So before you even think about buying a house in this economy, I want you to try to get your credit score as high as possible before you even think about buying a house. Because right now, like interest rates are at 8%. If your credit score is like really low, they could give you a different type of loan, not even like an FHA loan that would cost you a lot more per payment. You don't want that. Just wait another year to make sure your credit score is higher. And not only that, you can save for a down payment. This is another thing that a lot of people do that's kind of dumb. But there are a lot of loan packages out there that are really great. Like for instance, the rural development FHA loan. But if you have like zero money, zero cash for purchasing a house, then you probably have no business buying your very first home. But if you don't have that type of money for a down payment, think about all the money you're going to need to turn on your electricity, for inspections, for closing costs, to turn on your water, to move you into that brand new house. All of those things cost money. And if you don't have the money for a small down payment as little as 3%, how are you going to have the money to do all those other little tiny purchases as well? So make a budget of how much it's going to cost you to actually physically move into a house. I know there's a lot of you that watch my channel that are older, but this is one of those videos you need to pass on to your younger generations, because right now there's so many people that are having this fear of missing out on the housing market. The lack of supply of homes is at record numbers. Inventory is so low and people feel pressured to buy a house, especially when they see all their friends buying a house, so they want to buy a house too. Not only that, rents are so expensive, and you're seeing a lot of these charts that other real estate agents put up are saying, what's the cost compared to renting and compared to owning? But the other thing that they don't mention in those charts is the fact that you have to maintain a house. And that's another reason why there's a lot of people that shouldn't purchase a house. But there's all those things throughout the year that people don't think about, like changing out the air filters, mowing the lawn. You also have to remember, about painting your house. I have to stain and paint my front of the house all the time, every 2 years max, or it just looks terrible. And then there's like mulching, and that is expensive too. Mulch isn't cheap anymore. Maintaining a house is not cheap. And if you're used to renting, that's a cost that you're not used to having in your budget whatsoever. And that's another reason why people make a really dumb mistake in buying a house, because they didn't plan for that ahead of time. So back in August, Yahoo Finance came out with an article that said 93% of people regret buying a house. I don't know about that statistic personally, but there were 6 good reasons in that specific article. 33% of them said that their home was too much maintenance. We did talk about that. 30% say they bought too quickly. The market was moving so fast during the pandemic that there were people that settled on a house that they didn't really want, but it was what they could afford and they won the bid. So they kind of like dealt with their purchase, but it still has a bunch of things that they don't really necessarily love about their house. The problem with that is right now they couldn't even sell it if they tried to, because they bought it at like a 2.5 interest rate, right? And the interest rates now are at over 8%. So that would make their payments so much higher if they tried to get a house that was a little bit bigger than what they currently have. That's why the market is the way it is. That's why we have a tightening of supply of homes. There's just too many people that are locked into that really small interest rate. And who wants to pay more for less house? Not me, and not them either. Another thing that people do, and it says it right here, number 3, is they spend too much. And I know this happened to me during the pandemic. I had a young woman who was trying to buy her very first house, and we found a house. Whenever the appraisal came in less money than the purchase price of the house. We'll just say it was $250,000 was the purchase price, and the appraisal came in at $230,000. There was a $20,000 discrepancy between the two. And in my brain, in my real estate brain, there's no way with being that young that I would have taken $20,000 and put it down and gave it to the seller to purchase the house. It couldn't go into the loan. Real estate market may be stagnant, but be smart about your money. Find out if it's really going to increase in value enough for you to want to continue with the purchase of that house. Another thing I want to tell you is if you don't plan on staying in that house at least 7 years, don't freaking buy a house. Anytime there's ever an economic up and down, which we always have them, the best time to buy is if you're going to be able to stay in that home for at least 7 years. Anybody that bought during the height of the market, during housing crash last time, felt like, oh my gosh, I made a huge mistake. But after 7 years, it all worked out for them. Very little people lost money if they held on to that property after 7 years. So if you don't plan on keeping that property for more than 7 years, please don't buy a house. Please just don't buy a house. I think the thing that bothers me the most when people make really dumb decisions with buying a house is that I hear some of the pressure and sales tactics that was used against that person in order for them to purchase the house. Whether that be a real estate agent, whether that be family members, whether that be a lender. They come up with all these ways to push that person into purchasing a house, and then they have instant regrets soon as they move in. And if you need to be convinced to buy anything, doesn't matter if it's a house or not, then it's not a right decision for you. In my profession, it's happened with some real estate agents as well. They push people to buy a house. And there's one thing I can honestly say in my over 50 years of life, that if my gut tells me this ain't right, then it ain't right. Don't feel like you have to buy a house. I know that some people are like, it won't be there tomorrow. It may not be there tomorrow, but it wasn't the right time for you right now. The housing market is crazy right now. And I don't think everybody should be buying a house, but maybe I'm wrong about this. Is there other things that happen to people that you know about that shouldn't be buying a house? Tell me your stories in the comment section below. I really like to hear them because I have several, but there are people out there that never should have bought a home. That's for darn sure. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens in the next 3 years with all these houses that people have bought that they regret. To watch more videos about the housing market, you're gonna wanna watch these videos right here. My name is Kristina Smallhorn, your real estate whisperer, and I tell you all this because good real estate information matters.